On a ruthless Alaskan night, an old woodsman opened his door to two starving wolves, begging for shelter. What followed not only defied nature, but revealed a bond that would change his life forever. Why did these wild predators place their trust in him, and what did they lead him to next? On a bitterly cold winter's eve, when the wind howled like distant spirits across the frozen Alaskan tundra, and each breath felt like shards of glass against his lungs, Warren Pierce, an aged woodsman, whose face was lined by decades of snow, wind, and solitude, sat by the flickering hearth of his snug cabin, the logs crackling in a warm symphony that chased away the chill, and he let his tired limbs rest after a long day spent tending the small greenhouse he'd built with his own hands and stacking enough split wood by the door to last through the black night. The glow from the oil lamp on his workbench cast dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls, and outside the world lay buried in a blanket of pristine white, untouched except for the tracks of creatures seeking shelter, when suddenly two gaunt, snow-coated wolves materialized at his doorstep, their fur stiff with frost, their ribs visible beneath mangy coats, and instead of snarling or baring teeth, they trembled and whimpered in low, plaintive tones, pressing their muzzles against the threshold, as if they understood precisely where warmth and kindness might be found. Warren's heart pounded with surprise and a pang of sympathy. He had seen their kind from afar, but never so close, never so pleadingly vulnerable, and though every instinct in his blood urged caution, every story of rogue packs or desperate beasts, driven mad by hunger, whispered warnings in his mind, he could not ignore the sorrowful light in their golden eyes, a silent plea that spoke louder than any growl, and with hands rough and calloused from years of splitting wood and repairing leaky roofs, he rose slowly, each creaking bone reminding him of his age, and shuffled to the door, setting aside the loaded shotgun that usually rested nearby, for he felt in that moment that no bullet could heal a wounded spirit, or fill an empty stomach. He cleared the snow from the threshold with deliberate care, the crisp flakes scattering like diamonds in the lamplight, and he cracked the door open just enough to slip through himself, ushering in a gust of frigid air that made the flames dance higher in protest, and the two wolves stepped inside with cautious reverence, their paws leaving damp prints on the wooden floorboards, as they shook off the ice that clung to their coats, sending a cloud of glittering frost into the lamplit air. Warren watched in awe as they pressed closer to the hearth, their bodies shivering uncontrollably at first, then slowly relaxing as the glow of the fire seeped into their bones, and he felt a lump in his throat, an ache born of years spent alone in these woods, watching daylight fade and family memories drift into the past, until tonight in this humble cabin, he found a new kind of companionship blossoming in the shadows. He spoke to them in soft, gentle tones, words of comfort and reassurance that he wasn't sure they understood, but that filled the room with a tender warmth, and he fetched a shallow bowl of warm water, and set it before them, marveling as they lapped at it with grateful urgency, their growls of hunger muted beneath the crackling logs. Then he offered a slab of raw venison he had reserved for emergencies, and the wolves devoured it hungrily, their eyes never leaving his face, as though they recognized the hope he represented, a promise of safety in a world so merciless that even the strongest sometimes faltered. All the while the wind continued its sad song outside, but inside the cabin, with its rough timber walls and the simple steadiness of the fire, there was a fragile peace, a reminder that compassion could melt even the hardest winter, and in the quiet hush that followed the meal, Warren knelt before them, his old bones creaking in protest, and gently stroked the rough fur of the smaller wolf, feeling its ribs against his hand, and tracing the line of its spine with a tenderness he had long forgotten. He possessed. As he worked, he promised himself that he would do whatever it took to see these creatures through the long night, to nurse them back to strength, and in the days to come they would teach him something new about trust and forgiveness, for in the meeting of man and wild that cold night, each had offered the other a chance at survival, and a lesson in the healing power of unexpected mercy, all beneath the silent stare of the northern lights, dancing faintly above the snow-bound world. Once the wolves had settled by the hearth, their bodies still trembling from the cold and exhaustion, Warren Pierce closed the door against the raging wind and took a moment to study the two fragile creatures whose trust he had so suddenly earned. Their ribs showed through fur matted with ice and dust, proof of days spent scavenging in the snowdrifts, and as he knelt to stoke the fire's embers with fresh logs, he felt the heat wash over him like a benediction, warming his tired bones and lifting the weight of loneliness he had carried through so many silent winters. He carried a small slab of raw venison from his larder, his hands shaking not from the chill but from compassion, and he placed it on a sturdy wooden platter before the wolves, who hesitated only a moment before devouring it with urgent desperation. Each bite seemed to restore a flicker of life to their gaunt frames, and their eyes, once dull and lifeless, shone with a quiet gratitude that settled into Warren's heart and made it ache with humility. After they had eaten, he gathered soft blankets he kept for emergencies and laid them out in a corner beside the hearth, tucking one gently around the smaller wolf as it collapsed into a grateful sleep. The larger sibling circled protectively, its head low and alert, as if to guard both the fire and Warren himself from any threat that might break through the walls of the cabin. When he noticed the smaller wolf's hind leg quivering unnaturally as it shifted its weight, Warren's training as a woodsman and occasional volunteer with a local wildlife refuge guided his hands. He fetched warm water in a basin, added a touch of iodine he used for his own cuts, and returned to the animal's side speaking in soft, soothing tones that he had once used to calm frightened neighbors during brutal blizzards. As he gently cleaned the wound and wrapped it in gauze torn from an old shirt, he hummed a lullaby his mother had sung to him as a child, and the wolf's breathing slowed, its muscles relaxing under his gentle ministrations. All the while the larger wolf paced in a slow arc around them, its ears flicking at every creak of the cabin, every whisper of the wind against the walls, but it never lunged or snapped. Instead it watched with solemn intelligence, as though granting permission for this strange act of tenderness. In that humble room, filled only with the scent of pine smoke and the soft crackle of flame, a profound bond took root, a fragile alliance between a solitary man and two wild souls who had lost their way in a merciless world. Warren found himself talking to them as he worked, telling them stories of summers spent fishing in the clear mountain streams, of evenings by his grandmother's hearth when she taught him the names of forest plants, and how to listen to the calls of owls at midnight. The wolves listened in their own fashion, lifting their heads to catch his every inflection, their eyes reflecting the dancing shadows in the firelight. As the night deepened and the storm raged with renewed fury beyond the cabin walls, Warren covered the wolves with extra blankets, making sure they were as comfortable as possible. He even sacrificed a portion of his own dinner of stew, ladling warm broth into a chipped enamel bowl and proffering it to the larger wolf, who sniffed hesitantly, then lapped it down with visible relief. Throughout the hour, he rose and fell in rhythm with the wolves' breathing, sometimes checking the smaller animal's bandage for warmth and snugness, sometimes simply sitting by the hearth and whittling a small wooden toy, a reminder of his own grandchildren he had not seen in years, to offer as a token of friendship to the larger wolf when it awoke. In those quiet moments, Warren felt tears sting his eyes as he realized how hungry he had been not only to help but to connect, and how these wild creatures, so often seen as symbols of danger, had become his companions and his pupils in a lesson of compassion. By the time dawn's pale light seeped through the frosted window panes, the wolves slept side by side, their bodies relaxed and breathing even, the trust they had placed in Warren manifest in their unguarded peace. As he watched them, Warren understood that this night of kindness and care had healed more than their wounds. It had healed a part of his own soul that he had forgotten existed. In the fragile hush of morning, with the promise of tomorrow's journey looming, a new chapter in their intertwined lives began, a chapter based on empathy over fear, on gentle hands over raised weapons, and on a mutual understanding that survival in the wild depended not only on strength, but on the grace of unexpected friendship. At the first pale hint of dawn, as the sky lightened from inky black to soft lavender, a figure emerged through the swirling snowdrifts at Warren Pierce's cabin door. Kara Jennings, a dedicated wildlife researcher from the State Conservation Agency, bundled in layers of insulated gear and carrying a radio that crackled with tenuous signals of warmth and welcome, she introduced herself in a voice that trembled with both relief and urgency, explaining that she had been tracking this very pair of siblings for weeks, following their feeble pawprints across frozen rivers and windswept plains, and that their survival was critical to the fragile balance of the local ecosystem. With shared determination, Warren and Kara set about preparing for the arduous journey to the field camp, where a team stood ready with more supplies and medical care. Warren loaded his old snowmobile with extra blankets, food, and Kara's portable tagging kit, while Kara secured the wolves, now calm and trusting, into makeshift sled harnesses she'd fashioned from rope and spare straps, all the while speaking soothingly to them, her breath visible in tight clouds before her face, her hands steady, despite the gale that threatened to obliterate visibility at any moment. As they plunged into the storm's heart, the snowmobile's engine roared defiantly against the whipping wind, carving a narrow path through drifts that towered like frozen waves, and Warren guided the sleds across uneven ground, crouched low to reduce drag and keep the wolves as close to the warmth of the machine as possible, while Kara monitored their vitals through the clear windows of her emergency shelters, suspended above the runners. Midway through their journey, when whiteout conditions seemed most oppressive, a faint whimper reached their ears, a sound that might have been lost in the howling gale if not for Kara's trained ear, and following the plaintive cry, they discovered a third wolf, its body gaunt beyond belief, hoof marks on its flank, from a misguided sprint toward a distant herd, and its spirit flickering like a candle in oil-soaked wind. Without hesitation, Warren lifted the animal into his arms, his own tears freezing at the corners of his eyes, as he felt the rapid shallow beats of its heart, and Kara quickly worked to stanch a bleeding shoulder wound with antiseptic and bandages she produced from her parka pocket, as the trio of wolves nestled together on the sled, forever bonded by shared peril. Warren and Kara pressed on through waist-high snow, their combined resolve a beacon against the storm's wrath, until finally the field camp rose like an oasis amid the white desert, a cluster of sturdy tents, solar panels glinting through frosted rime, and the welcoming glow of lanterns strung between snow poles. There, a rescue team adorned in bright orange jackets met them, gently transferring each wolf into comfortable crates padded with straw and soft cloth, administering sedatives to ease their journey ahead, and fitting them with lightweight radio collars that would record their eventual release. As Warren watched the three siblings, now huddled together and drifting into calming sleep, load into the covered trailer bound for the rehabilitation center, his breath caught in his throat. He felt a surge of emotion hotter than any fire he had kindled in his cabin hearth, pride that his simple act of mercy had catalyzed a rescue of this rare pack, gratitude toward Kara and her team for their tireless work, and a profound sense of wonder at the unexpected turns life can take when kindness overrides fear. When the vehicle's taillights disappeared down the snow-choked road, leaving only the echo of its engine and the distant calls of ravens, Warren stood alone in the silent morning, the storm having retreated to a soft whisper, and he pressed his palm against the cabin door, where those wolves had first pleaded for help. In that moment, tears slid down his weathered cheeks, warm against the frost on his beard, as he whispered a silent promise to the wild that he would continue to protect those who wander lost and broken, and that he would carry with him forever the memory of 3 fragile lives restored, a testament to the unbreakable bond between human compassion and the resilient beauty of nature.